Okay, so in this third part of the video, we now want to talk about the fractional reserve banking system, and more specifically, how that fractional reserve banking system actually, in combination with the Federal Reserve printing money, leads to a money supply. Okay, so in general, banks are required to keep about, it varies on how big or small they are, but banks are generally required to hold only about 10% of their total deposits. Banks then lend out the other 90% in an attempt to earn higher interest, right, by lending out the money, and then they can pay their expenses, pay their shareholders, and they rely on the fact that people store cash at the bank and don't come for it very often, and even if they do come for it, not everyone comes to the bank at once. If they do, that's called a bank run, right? So if you watch, like, It's a Wonderful Life, like, you would have seen everyone like running to the bank to get out their cash. That was a bank run. Now, we largely eliminated bank runs in the 1930s when we set up the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And credit unions set up a similar institution called the NCUA, the National Credit Union Administration. And basically what both of those organizations do is they insure deposits. So I don't have to worry about what U.S. Bank says they have in their vaults and whether they've lent out too much cash. Because I know that the FDIC insures all my deposits up to $250,000. I know that as long as I have $250,000 or under, I don't have to. I will get my cash back. Before that, you could have told me a rumor like, oh my God, I heard that U.S. Bank just, lost out on a big loan, and now the bank, doesn't have very much left in their vault. What would I do, right? I would run to the bank and try to get my money out fast, right? And rumors would spread so that all the cash was taken out immediately. That's largely eliminated now. I say largely. There are still rather large banks, especially with this most recent banking crisis, that did fail because everyone started to take their cash out. The big one being Washington Mutual, of which I was a shareholder, not a shareholder, a depositor. I had like $11 in my checking account, but I didn't lose any money. I got a check from the from the FDIC for my $11. Okay, so banks are lending out then most of the cash, and they're only keeping about 10% of it. So now what we actually want to do here is we actually want to start to draw out what that looks like in terms of the accounting of it. Okay, so we got the tried and true whiteboard here. I bet you'll be glad when this class is done. You'll never have to see this whiteboard again. No, unless you take Principles of Micro online with me, then I guess you'd have to see it again. Okay, so let's say that the now we're going to talk about this situation a little bit more. But let's say one of the things that the Federal Reserve does is it buys and sells existing debt with that FOMC organization. And let's say that here, this is the scenario, is that the Federal Reserve is going to buy a $1,000 U.S. Treasury bond. Okay, so if they buy it with basically cash that they create out of thin air, right? They're going to actually, they'll call up the Bureau of Engraving and Printing and say, give us $1,000. Not really. What they do now is they, go into the computer and they just type in add $1,000. So they're going to buy a $1,000 bond. Let's say they buy it from me. I owned it. I bought it when it was originally issued, and the Federal Reserve is going to buy it from me. Okay, so it was like, it was sitting under my mattress, which is where I keep all of my bonds, and I sold it to the Federal Reserve, who bought it from me. Okay, so let's say then that at my bank, there are assets and liabilities. And the asset would be that in the bank vault at this one moment in time, there's now $1,000. My $1,000 check I got from the Federal Reserve is sitting in their vaults. Okay? So that's a reserve. It is an asset. Now, my deposit at the bank is also a liability to the bank, right? Because I can always go to the bank to get my $1,000 out. So at this one moment in time, assets and liabilities, and both sides have to equal out. Now, banks don't want to keep the $1,000 in cash here. They want to lend it out. So we need to split up this reserves now into required reserves and excess reserves. And to do that, we need to know something else. What we need to know is the required reserve ratio. What the Federal Reserve is going to require banks to hold. Let's keep our life easy here. Or relatively easier. And let's say that they have a required reserve ratio of 25%. Okay, so what that would then mean sorry that you just sit there waiting while I write this out, is that the assets would now be broken down into required reserves of $250. That would be the 1,000 times 25%. The excess reserves, which are $750, they're going to want to lend this out. And still this $1,000 would equal this $1,000 here. Okay, so now in the third step of this, they actually lend it out. So this is step 1, this is step 2, step 3. What we do here is we basically convert the excess reserves into a loan. And that loan is going to be made to someone else, right? Let's say it's made to my sister, right, who uses the money to buy a really, really shitty car, right, for $750. Right, in that case, we're going to have a step 4. And that step 4 is going to start with my sister getting that $750 in her bank. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video here, and we're going to pick it up with step 4.